Um, I think there is also something specific, is that in the Dutch society you do a lot of things with, through internet, like a lot of things. They are going to dematerialization a lot, and they are very dense cities. Because another problem, I think a biggest problem than the one of the fraud, that is one problem, is also the fact that there could be a huge inequality in terms of access to internet. If I think to a country that are super rural, for example, you have places where you can't access internet. So you increase what you were, I think, you rightly pointed out, as the fact that there is with direct democracy, there could be a huge gap between cities, highly densely populated, where people could gather signatures quite easily, and rural areas. So if you had to that, the issues of access to internet. So I would say that yes, in the Netherlands there are also this. It was very also defended by the Pirates Party. They use a lot e-platform at the municipal level. So there is also this culture toward getting more to dematerialization, where there is also some safety procedures in place, and quite well in place, I would say, to e-voting.
Who operates referendums? The government or private institutions?
It's in law. So the government, I think, needs to do it.
Collection of signatures is done, but it's done in the society, and then they are validated, checked by the government, the electoral commission,
actually. It's inexistent, I would say. There is a big. I think perhaps you heard about the yellow vest movement. There's people with yellow vest. So there is a demand for direct democracy that is quite explicit, with a clear mechanism on different forms of referendums. The French are always used to create new things, so they create the what they call the citizen initiative. It's called CAR for Constitution, on constitution matters, repeal, legislative one, and the last one is and a recall. So it's four measure in a single package, and basically so most of the political parties are opposed to it. The current government is opposed to it and strongly opposed to it. So I would say there has the way it is going in France right now is much more about participatory mechanism at the local level, to avoid speaking about direct democracy, because it was the government made quite clear that in the current debate on institutional reforms there will not be discussion on the referendums and direct democracy, because it would alter the representative nature of the French government, which is not really a good argument to my opinion. But yes, in existence, it's a tense situation in France right now on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, what you refer to is also discussed sometimes as the direct and indirect effects of direct democracy, of referendum votes, or citizens' initiatives. And as you mentioned correctly, in Japan, it's a bit complicated because it's not directly binding. And even before that, first, actually, a municipal parliament and mayor have to agree to draw up a referendum ordinance. So without legal basis, you cannot even have these local referendums, and there's only a couple dozens of municipalities that have a local referendum ordinance. So first you need to have that. So out of the thousands of municipalities, only a couple have local referendum ordinance. Okay, let's presume you have that. And then typically in Japan you only get referendum topics are when there's two big issues. One, if there's a merger of municipalities and people are against, and the others are not in my backyard topics. So as we heard this morning, military facility or a huge dam or construction work, waste, sewage facilities, such things. So not in my backyard type. But the pattern still is in Japan that if you have a mayor who's willing to accept that in favor of and is close enough to his policies, then fine, it might work. But it's still very normal in Japan that they just flat out say, no, not of our business. You can hand in a petition with thousands, in big cities, millions of signatures. You can have even a vote in these municipalities that allow it, but it can simply be ignored and no major consequences. Whereas in Switzerland, even we have quite detailed studies about this phenomenon, and even if a direct democratic vote got rejected at the ballot, even the ones that were rejected usually they leave some traces in the legislation. So latest detailed study says actually that 50% of the votes that didn't go through still leave a trace in the sense of the original proposal. So, but again, in Switzerland, it's reinforced because it's binding. Normally we have almost no non-binding referendum votes. For municipal mergers, it exists at the local level, but normally it's binding. So it's completely different ecosystem for direct democracy, I would say. And the typical answer is that in Switzerland, and also it was mentioned before, the typical answer is that in Switzerland you had some, let's say, fertile ground for these French Revolution ideas to take root and grow, because there was already this tradition of male citizen assembly, like this Landsgemeinde, which already existed from the Middle Ages onwards. So kind of the ancient version of a town hall meeting, just for the management of the common goods, like how to deal with water rights, the woods, hunting, the fields. Kind of the whole rural world was governed, of course, also by elite. You know, in the old days, of course, in the Middle Ages, these were males who had were landowners, had big enough fortune, and were allowed to carry a weapon. Only those were the ones allowed to gather. But then, when you combine this idea with French Revolution, this was the fertile ground that already existed, so that these ideas of the French Revolution were able to grow. That's the typical explanation in Switzerland. And in France?
You had it.
You had it as well?
You had it, yeah.
I didn't know about that.
The Alpines, yeah.
But in the Alpine, yes, in the Alpine regions, but France is a highly centralized country. Everything is in Paris, so no way you had it in Paris. So, but you can continue.
React to that and on the first question. I think an easy also answer to that is the fact that France was on the verge of a war also with neighbors just after the revolution. So it was decided that the implementation of the constitution would be suspended until the end of the threat to the French territorial integrity, because basically all the kingdoms next to France were kind of allying together to get the king back in power. So the idea was really not to bury the constitution, was to put it on hold, and then the terror start. But the idea was to wait and then implement it afterwards. It was not the case. Switzerland had an explanation we gave also is that it started, but I don't know how much this is really a key explanation. It's also started in place in Switzerland that were hard to conquer in some sense because of the mountains also, and not a lot of things to exploit. You think it's because it's kind of sometimes historians raise that, but we found there are a lot of evidence of the existence of these town meetings in France, even close to Grenoble, in this part of the city where you had really also this meetings taking place. But then of course the revolution also centralized the power much more than it was in the past, clearly.
I just wanted to add, Uwe told already that maybe some kind of community town halls pre-existed already in Switzerland. But this is also a little bit disputed, because these community town halls were quite unequal. Like a lot of people were excluded, like women, poor people, and so on. So, for example, the first cantonal constitution in Zurich, which had like a wide-scale direct democratic rights, the people there, the founders of this constitution, explicitly said, it's not a thing about we don't have the idea from the community town halls. It's something new. It's not this. So they really said, yeah, it's something new. Everybody's included. So yeah, I just wanted to add that yeah.
Well, maybe to start this, one reason I think is in some countries, direct democracy on the national level can actually make things worse. As we heard this morning, and in Canada, in some parts also, where you have deeply divided societies, so where you have a deep cleavage along religion or language, for example, when you have several referendums on different topics, but the result is always this side against that side, then the cleavage might go deeper, deeper and deeper until really violence breaks out. So I think of course this is the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. We are generally in favor of direct democracy. We might favor this. We think it's important to move on. But I think we should be careful. In some societies, it could be very dangerous. And I think in the US, with also history of civil war, like North against South, it could potentially have been too dangerous to bring in direct democracy on a national level. Belgium as well, I would say, is really not a good idea to do that at the moment. And in Switzerland, you could say Switzerland was lucky, and sometimes in history you're just lucky as a country, because in Switzerland these cleavages across society, religion, left, right, urban, countryside, French-speaking, German-speaking, they are, we say, cross-cutting. Is not the French-speaking are all Catholics and urbanized. It cuts across these cleavages. And that's why kind of when you have referendum votes, typically in Switzerland nowadays, everybody loses and wins. You know, it's not always the same that lose. Otherwise, it could be dangerous, I think.
It's good to have debate. I'm not sure I agree with what you said, because it's also a way for we know that system that exclude a minority are also, you know, creating much more contestation. So that direct democracy could be a way also to arbitrate conflict in some sense in a peaceful manner, that you don't size harms.
Constellation really depends.
Because if you look at the U.S. case, the study on the minority rights, especially like in terms of support of direct democracy, is quite strong. I think the last one from Matsusaka was quite clear that there is still
on
a
the
support.
state level, the
Yeah,
question is on
yeah.
national level.
Yeah, but I mean, if I think another possible explanation for that is also the foreign policy aspect of it, and this is perhaps an area that I know I research a lot. I think that in the US, the foreign policy is also very centralized, and it's organized around the president and a group of experts, and there is also this the fact that there is a strong support for the US to take a role and a strong role in international policies, and of course when you have discussion and direct democracy on the foreign policy level, it may lead to impact where people could stop participating to an international organization. So I think this foreign policy dimension and the fact that this is something very, very important in US politics is also playing a role in that, I would say.